Hello and welcome to this spotlight episode on Hetton Lyon, a locomotive preserved thanks to century-old fake news. Hetton Lyon was once thought to have been built in 1822 by George Stephenson himself for the Hetton Colliery in County Durham. The colliery was begun in 1816 by the aristocratic Lyon family. Her late Majesty, the Queen Mother, Elizabeth Angela Marguerite Bowes Lyon, was of the same Lyon lineage. The railway was designed and built by George Stephenson. It was 8 miles long, and it was the first railway to be designed and engineered for mechanical traction alone. The earlier Middleton Railway in Leeds had been the first to adopt mechanical traction using locomotives and inclined planes in 1812. But that was an adaptation of an earlier route. The Hetton Railway opened in 1822 using stationary engines and locomotives designed by George Stephenson. 3 were built for the opening of the line and 2 more were in service by 1823. Lyon has a long and remarkable history. She came to public attention in 1881 at the Stephenson centenary, where she was photographed as being a locomotive built by George Stephenson, and from then on the legend stuck. She was photographed still at work in 1902 by the Railway magazine, when she was credited as being the oldest working locomotive in the world. Withdrawn for preservation in 1912, she took a starring role at the 1925 cavalcade to mark the centenary of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, and even made her way under steam to the London and North Eastern Railways Museum in York in the 1930s. All in all, it's quite a remarkable story. Recent research by Dr. Michael Bailey and Peter Davidson, undertaken in the spring of 2019, however, shows that Lyon is not as old as the fake news would have us believe. The great antiquity of Lyon was challenged first in 1995 and again in 2001 when it was proposed that she had been built by Sir Lindsay Wood, grandson of George Stephenson's friend Nicholas Wood, during the 1840s. Given that Sir Lindsay would have still been a teenager at the time, this is now thought to be unlikely. Rigorous study of the surviving locomotive and archival documents show that Lyon was probably built sometime between 1849 and 1854. She was one of 3 locomotives built for the Hetton Colliery Railway at that time. They were named Lyon, Fox and Lady Barrington. They were driven by 3 brothers, Jimmy, Jack and Dick Ford. Although the later fate of Fox is unknown, Lady Barrington's boiler exploded in December 1858, killing Jimmy and his son. Quite as to why the Hetton Colliery would build such antiquated designs as late as 1849 is unknown, but it does show how the essential concept of George Stephenson's locomotives was a still valid and workable design. The fact that Lyon had a working life of 60-odd years is proof that the Stephenson design was durable and fit for purpose. Fitted with a multi-tubular boiler, Lyon is the ultimate expression of George Stephenson's Killingworth-built locomotives. Unlike Killingworth Billy, which also underwent a minute examination, whilst none of it actually dates from 1816 when it was built, Billy has retained key features, including the geometry of the valve gear, the wheel spacing and cylinders from its build date, preserved in its present form, and this proved crucial for being able to finally give her a date. Lyon, however, shares none of these characteristics with the Stephenson locomotive from 1822. Furthermore, her boiler is multi-tubular and is of the long plate type, a type of boiler introduced in the 1830s and 1840s and made from 4 longitudinal plates riveted together, rather than the more usual concentric rings. The size of the boiler plates is such that the boiler could not have been made much earlier than about 1849. What we do know of her history is that Lyon was heavily rebuilt in 1882. This rebuilding included the installation of a link valve gear worked by a 3-positioned quadrant on the footplate, giving 4 back and mid gear. Other mod cons include a blower to help steam raising, an injector to put water back into the boiler, and even sandboxes to help with adhesion. At some time in her career, she gained a cab perched on the side of the boiler. Lyon does show evidence of her long life, as the leading cylinder is patched on its left-hand side. A new tender was made for her in 1882, replacing the wooden original. Sadly, the 1882 tender was very heavily modified in 1925 by the London and North Eastern Railway for the Stockton and Darlington centenary. On temporary loan to Beamish Museum for 8 years, Lyon can now be seen on display at Locomotion Museum in Shildon, and, whilst not as venerable as once thought, certainly deserves her place in preservation, even if she owes that preservation to fake news. Sometimes it can be a force for good. So that's been a quick look at Hetton Lyon. A locomotive, whilst not as old as once thought, has a fascinating story to tell nonetheless. Dr. Bailey and Mr. Davidson will be presenting their full findings at the 7th International Early Railway Conference to be held in June this year. I, for one, am looking forward to it, and I will also be presenting a paper. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and if you have, please like, share, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook, and perhaps you'd also like to support me on Pateron. So that's it this time, and see you all next week on Rail Story.